Do you need some more water? Sorry, Chris, do you want to?
I'm good. No, I'm good.
Excellent. Grand. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Atkinson. I'm the assistant editor here at Conservative Home. And today's panel is on fixing the justice system, changing culture through enhancing social mobility. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Rachel Maclean, the Minister of State for Justice, Professor Chris Bones, Chair of Silex, who very kindly sponsored today's event, Sarah Atkinson, no relation, the Chief Executive of the Social Mobility Foundation. And so the justice system is under severe strain at the moment, from striking barristers to the persistent backlogs in the courts that we've seen as a consequence of COVID. This is a system that is under a strain and needs to, in many ways, change if it is to survive in a way that ensures that the standards of British justice, to which we are also suitably wedded, are maintained. And as part of that, and what should be a major focus of today's event, is in social mobility, because as we were discussing before the event began, Chris, the government's ambition is to go for growth. Of course, going for growth means getting the best people in the positions where they should be. And social mobility has always been at the heart of Conservative arguments and what our party believes. So applying these principles to the justice system is just as important as it is to any other aspect of government. And the format of today's event shall be, once I end my monologue, to go and have opening remarks from each of our panellists. And then I will probably ask them a couple of questions, and then I'll throw things open to the floor. Without further ado, I'll end my monologue, and you can start to hear from our panellists. So, Rachel.
Oh. Shall I stand up?
No,
Okay.
please.
Thank you very much indeed, William, for that lovely introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here with my fellow panellists, and thank you to Conservative Home for inviting me to give my remarks on this vitally important topic. And I strongly agree with what you've just said, William, about how social mobility is at the heart of what we as Conservatives believe, and it is vital for a thriving economy, and it is vital for the justice system. So if I may, I will structure my remarks. I will talk a bit about the specific issues in front of us today, and then I will talk a little bit more broadly about the justice system as a whole, because I suspect we will have some questions on that as well. So the legal sector does face some serious challenges, that's no secret, and especially when it does come to recruiting people from diverse backgrounds. And actually, they're not alone as a profession. I mean, to be fair, let's look in the mirror. Politics experiences some of those same challenges. We've got work to do. So why is it so important? Well, among my responsibilities in the Ministry of Justice, which I've had for less than a month, one of them is I am the Victims Minister. And so what I hear from victims of crime, both as a minister and, of course, as a local MP for Redditch, brilliant Redditch, lovely to see my friends from Redditch here in the audience, what I hear is that they need to feel that the system understands them and can actually understand their lives to deliver justice. And I believe, therefore, that the more we can widen the pool of backgrounds of people on the front line, in the profession, the more the public will have confidence that they are heard, that they are understood, and that justice is done. So it is imperative that we draw from a wide and diverse pool of talent. So what is the government doing? Well, current or former barristers comprise 58% of all judges and 95% of senior judges, even though they form only 9% of all lawyers. In 2021, the former Lord Chancellor committed the Ministry of Justice to explore barriers to appointment for other parts of the legal profession to the judiciary, so that we open up those routes and broaden that pool of talent. So we are looking at barriers to the appointment of chartered legal executives, lawyers currently in the Crown Prosecution Service, and other diverse groups of lawyers, such as general counsel and legal academics. And in fact, all of these groups are likely to be more socially diverse than independent barristers. And the MOJ will provide an update at the next meeting of the Judicial Diversity Forum in November. There's some other really important initiatives, such as the pre-application judicial education programme. That's an outreach programme to people who are thinking of applying to the judiciary, that works with some underrepresented groups, particularly women, some ethnic minorities, and solicitors and legal executives. And that will help bring in candidates from more diverse backgrounds. And in fact, it's already working. The most recent analysis shows that it's having an impact, and that candidates who attend these panels might be more likely to succeed when they're applying for judicial office. There is still a long way to go. An agreement has been reached to consistently measure social mobility in the judiciary and legal professions using 3 standard questions designed by the Social Mobility Commission. I'm sure we'll hear more about that later. And that we are planning to commence reporting on the social background of judges in 2025. And that will be key to deepening our understanding of the issues facing the sector and how we will address those root causes. So, of course, the government can't do everything on its own. It's really important that we work with the professions and all the bodies that represent them, so legal regulators, the Legal Services Board, the Bar Council, the Law Society, the Bar Standards Board and the Solicitors Regulation Authority. They all have their own programmes and work streams aimed at improving diversity to address those areas of underrepresentation, particularly of women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities and people from different socio-economic backgrounds. And I'm no doubt we'll hear more suggestions from today's panel, which I will welcome. Turning to the justice system more broadly, because what we're all interested in is getting the wheels of justice moving and improving access to justice. I've just been in the main hall listening to Brandon Lewis. I think he delivered a fantastic speech talking about his priorities for the justice system as a whole. There is a lot of work to do. He mentioned the barristers' strike. So we have proposals there tabled, a generous offer. We believe it's a generous offer, and we do very much urge those barristers now to work with us to end the strike and deal with those court backlogs. My sort of key focus as a Justice Minister, amongst other things, is rape prosecutions and rape and serious sexual offences and violence against women and girls. And so I'm really proud that we are cracking on with rolling out the facility for victims of rape and modern slavery to give pre-recorded video evidence ahead of their trials. And that will be available, that is available now in all 83 Crown Courts in England and Wales. That spares victims the agony of that cross-questioning in a live courtroom environment. We do need the system to be far more compassionate to vulnerable victims of rape and sexual assault, and we will continue driving forward those reforms in the rape review. There's some fantastic work going on in the police under the banner of Operation Soteria. That ensures that the police focus on investigating the suspect, not the victim. I mean, to me, it seems incredible that we even have to say that, but we do. So we are ending the practice of taking away victims' phones from them, and the police have been fantastic at providing that training and providing that support. Of course, we also have to put support and resources into the system for victims and witnesses, and as part of the recent spending settlement we have £460 million worth of support services for victims and witnesses of crime. That's a huge amount of money that's going out on a multi-year basis, which is absolutely vital for those organisations providing the support. So the work is starting to deliver results. The convictions for rape offences are up 2/3 on 2020 and up by 1/4 compared to when the pandemic hit. So don't let anyone tell you, especially the Labour Party, tell you that we've decriminalised rape. We have not. We know there's more work to do, but we are absolutely focused on it. There's work going on in the parole board, if I may say, just a quick word at that. The Justice Secretary is determined to make that parole system clearer and more accountable to the public it serves. So we've changed the law to allow some of those parole hearings to be heard in public for the first time. And the Secretary of State will have greater oversight into release decisions for those most dangerous criminals. It is vital that we keep the public safe. And finally, a quick word on prisons. This is, of course, an integral part. Prisons need to punish people and keep the public safe, but they have a huge role in rehabilitation and reducing reoffending. The Ministry of Justice actually oversees the second largest infrastructure project in government spending £4 billion on delivering 18,000 new prison places. But within that, it's no good just having those places unless we think about the environment that those prisoners are in. We need that trauma-informed support and a regime for female offenders, many of whom are pregnant or have children and are victims of domestic abuse themselves. We need to think about those opportunities for training, education and work, and tackling drug and alcohol and misuse. That's all part of the prison strategy paper. That's a vision for the next decade of prisons, and we are proceeding on with that. So I think there's a huge amount of positive news that we are embarked on in the Ministry of Justice. I'm very proud to be part of it, and I very much look forward to the discussion this evening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Chris.
Thank you. So I thought I'd start with SILEX. If you don't know who the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives are, 75% are women, 20% now come from black or other ethnic minority backgrounds. They're primarily lawyers who qualify through work and experience rather than come out of university, but some of them have got graduates, and there's a graduate route to being a SILEX lawyer. 85% went to state school. Only 3% have parents who are lawyers, which gives a very different sort of particularly social background from the other two major professions. And I have my friends in the Law Society here, so I'm sure they'll hold me to account if I say anything about their profession. That's wrong. But so I want to start with that because our perspective is very different. You know, we basically have 20,000 members who are great examples of social mobility, and they've got through a system which actually is quite often stacked completely against them to be successful, whether it's in the justice system, as you were pointing out, Rachel, or in legal services more generally. And I want to start and just think about that. So I'd like to put growth front and centre in my remarks. Rightly, government are focused on growth and creating an economy that creates new and well-paid jobs and funds sustainable public services. But growth requires, I think, two things. A stable society that's underpinned by a legal system that's the consent of the vast majority of its citizens. And also a legal system that can liberate and bring confidence to commercial interactions and commerce more generally. And we have to remember about the legal system in England and Wales is it's chosen by a huge chunk of wealth creators around the world to be the place in which they want to do their legal and contracting business. And it is potentially a growth opportunity in itself if we get it right over the next few years. So let's start with consent. Consent comes from having a justice system that reflects the society it serves. And today, regrettably, in the first quarter of the 21st century, we're a million miles away from that. Today, 3/4 of our senior judges are white men. 50% of partners in firms regulated by the SRA come from private education, from public schools. If you're black or from an ethnic minority, you're much more likely to fail to apply to become a judge than to succeed. And by the way, all those senior white judges have the ability to block your application in secret rather than handle your application through an open and transparent way of operating. A chunk of this is, frankly, the result of old-fashioned prejudice and snobbery about university educations, and you're a bit like me and you're not like me, and some of it is restrictive practice. Consent also to a legal system means it has to be effective, and we have a very large backlog in the magistrates' courts and in the Crown Courts. And yet, for example, we have 125 assistant Crown prosecutors who current law doesn't allow to be promoted to Crown prosecutor unless we spend an awful lot of public money getting them to requalify as solicitors. Not because they're not qualified to do the job, but because the law says they don't have something called a general qualification. We can, and indeed there is a commitment to change that. And if we change it quickly, we can put up to probably 150 people into Crown Courts and Magistrate Courts tomorrow to start addressing the backlog. We also have problems with duty solicitors. So David will know this. At the moment, to be a duty solicitor, a qualified lawyer able to help people in a police station to the first point of contact and probably take them through to charge in front of a magistrate's court. You can only do that if you're recognised by a scheme run by the Law Society, who are the professional body for solicitors, which of course excludes chartered legal executives, 1,200 of whom could be duty solicitors if they're allowed to be recognised by the Law Society. This could be fixed and was committed to be fixed by government in the Legal Aid Review by recognising the SILEX qualification. These things are structural and sit in the way of people from very diverse backgrounds participating in a legal system and making it more effective. So let me turn to growth. Good growth in an economy is where everybody benefits, not just the privileged few. And the key to that is growth has to enable social mobility. It has to bring people in to wealth rather than exclude them from it. And at the moment in legal services, people are judged not on their outcomes, but more often than not on their inputs, where they went to university, whether they qualified as a solicitor or a barrister or something else. And in many firms, they're not allowed non-traditional lawyers to progress. So they're excluded from development paths to partner. They're excluded from graduate entry schemes because they didn't go to Russell Group universities. They are excluded from development because their firms refuse to pay for their professional qualifications and training. But if you were a solicitor or training to be a solicitor from a posh university, they're happy to pay. These things need to change, and they are part of what excludes many people from participating in the legal services sector, and it's taking talent out of the sector, which is in itself, I think, restricting growth. 75% of our members in the last survey we did told us they had to change their attitudes or their appearance in order to succeed working in a legal firm. This is the 21st century. We surely should be able to have diverse employment experiences where people feel accepted, encouraged and welcomed, regardless of how they speak, the colour of their skin, their gender, or their choice of identification of who they are. Nearly 80% of our black and ethnic minority members say they've experienced discrimination at work. If you look at apprentices, even the government doesn't help here. They've managed to allow solicitors who dominate the employer panel for apprentices to put a fee of 27,500, I think, 27,000 for a solicitor apprentice, but only a fee of 12,000 to become a specialist lawyer. These things can be changed and should be challenged, because what we're doing is we're building in discrimination into something that could be a huge generator of social mobility and growth in the economy. Now, some of this government can address, and I'm delighted to hear from Rachel that commitments made by the previous team in the Ministry of Justice will be carried through, and we have great commitments from government to reform the Prosecution of Offenders Act, to allow assistant prosecutors to become crown prosecutors, to attack applications in the judiciary, into higher levels of judiciary, to give SILEX advocates higher rights, and so on. And I think these are things that need to be done and hopefully will be done within the remaining 2 years of this Parliament. But the follow-through is key, and I guess my public plea is the follow-through is a focus for ministers as they're looking at all the other things and all the other challenges that they currently face. But a huge chunk of this is culture, and many of us would recognise that regardless actually of environments that we work in, that some of these patterns repeat and repeat. If you're a woman, or if you're from an ethnic minority, or if you're from a different social class to a sort of dominant profession, people experience this stuff, not just in the law. I think government could, and public bodies could, adopt standards when they do tenders and they employ legal firms. They could look harder and clearer. They could look at the data. I would encourage the Minister to discourage some of her colleagues from removing things like gender pay gap reporting and ethnic minority pay gap reporting. It is important to encourage social mobility, and the power of sunlight and transparency is a brilliant way of encouraging people to do things without legislation. And I think a conservative way of doing it is to force the data out and to then encourage people. And government have a power of convening. They convened with Hampton and Davis very good reports that have driven changes to the appointment of women in boards of the FTSE 350. That's now moving to top law firms, top accountancy firms this year. I think the power of convening potentially in this area for legal services could be brought together to encourage us as professions and regulators to maybe adopt some form of kite standard that says this is a socially mobile business and these are socially mobile outcomes. And we could, I think, David's nodding, I know we could, if we had the encouragement, probably push people that way. So a few ideas as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. And finally, last but not least, Sarah, you'll take on the issue.
Thank you. I work for the Social Mobility Foundation. We're a charity that works directly with young people who want to enter professions like the law. And we work with employers to help them to remove the barriers that prevent young people like the ones we work with from getting in. And we try and use all of that insight and all of that understanding and all of the voices of our young people to inform the things that we say and the work that we do. When it comes to the legal profession, the good news is, from where we sit, social mobility is clearly very much on the radar. Lots of law firms are collecting data, some of them are publishing, some required by their regulators, some going further than the regulator requires. Lots of law firms are engaged in really flagship outreach and engagement programs to encourage young people to think about the law, to mentor young people who might want to be interested in the law and to bring them in. There are lots of schemes and bursaries to support aspiring lawyers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The bad news from where we sit is all of that activity is not delivering the outcomes in terms of the access and the success of those people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in the profession, into the middle of the profession and, as has been described, into the top of the profession. It's really good to hear, Minister, you making the case for social mobility as a social and an economic one, because it's not right, and at this Conservative conference, I don't think it's very conservative that our background matters more than how hard we work and how talented we are. That's not the kind of country we want to be in. And I agree with Chris, it's not good for economic growth and prosperity if some people with talent and potential and aspiration aren't able to achieve their full potential because of where they grew up or the kind of family they grow up in, or because some doors are closed to them. Underemployment is no better for growth than unemployment. We need people to be able to achieve their potential. And of course it's not good for social cohesion if some young people, some whole communities feel left out of and written off from the opportunities that they want to pursue because they're just not for people like them. So it's really good to hear the case, Minister. And one thing I would say is that some of the mood music language about diversity and inclusion and kind of challenges to the impact of that, we need to be careful not to throw social mobility baby out with the kind of war on woke bathwater, because that messaging is really important. Social mobility needs to be part of diversity, inclusion and belonging in organisations. There are lots of hard barriers in the law, and they're often the ones that in social mobility people focus on. We work with our young people who are very clever and very hard-working to make sure they get the qualifications, they pass the tests, the aptitude challenges, they go through the competitive process that is required if you're going to be successful. But we know there is an attainment gap between young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and their more privileged peers at every stage of education. So we know those hard barriers get in the way. We also know that the evidence shows that unless you really take context into account, being wedded to academic performance as a predictor of your performance and your success in your professional career is actually not that helpful. If you do look at context, if you do understand how difficult it's been for a young person to achieve their academic grades, then you can start to look at it. But beyond that, it's not particularly helpful. So the weddedness of the profession to those top grades at those high tariff universities, it's not only not helpful for social mobility, it's actually not really doing the job that they're trying to do of finding the most successful and talented people. But I also think this conversation is right to think about culture, because those hard barriers are really important, and you can see them and you can identify them and you can work on them. But the softer, more insidious barriers of the kinds of behaviours of what we think of as successful people, the confidence, the polish. I cannot tell you how often the young people that we work with who are high academic achievers from challenging contexts, who have all the hunger, all the aspiration, all the talent you could possibly wish for, and they get told, you're not very confident, you don't speak up the way we need you to. You're not very polished. You've done really, really well, but not this time. And we look at the intake that have been chosen over them, and they are absolutely people from more privileged backgrounds who may be just as talented, but who carry that polish and that confidence with them. There are any number of things the young people we work with don't know, don't understand, whether it's about how your dinners get eaten and how meetings like this work, to how you get selected for the particular desk or the particular project that you want to work on, to having a champion in the room when the new intake is being talked about and there's no one there to speak up for you because you don't know anyone and you don't know how to network like that. We can teach our young people to get over all of those barriers in just the same way we can help them get over the hard barriers. But why should we have to? And why should they have to carry that extra effort with them every day when they're trying to do all the difficult things that we ask of them? Also to have to remember to think about the voice they speak in, the kinds of jokes they tell, tensing up in case somebody asks, what school did you go to? Because they don't mean Oldham Community College when they ask, what school did you go to? Or, as one young person on an internship for us this summer was asked, where do you summer? We know from the evidence this isn't just a pipeline issue, so it's really important that young people are able to get into the profession, into the firms, into the schemes. But it isn't just about waiting for them then to come through, because we know in the law profession, as in many other professions, the rate of lower socioeconomic background people as you go further up the organisation drops off significantly. People are entering and they're not succeeding. And again, culture is a big part of that. Young people that we work with, who we support to get into organisations, sometimes tell us 2-3 years in that they're moving on because the promises they were made about engagement, welcoming culture, supporting people from your background, recognition, are not being delivered on. It's not the experience they're having, and it's not for them. So you can't just get people in if you don't ensure that they get on and thrive. A couple of suggestions that I want to make, thinking about this in the broader perspective that we take as well as directly for the law profession. In education, yes, it's about closing that attainment gap. God knows it's about closing that attainment gap. But it's also about making sure that young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that every school has the opportunity for enrichment, for wider skills, debating and oracy, so critical for the profession we're talking about, so good for building your confidence, the chance to work on your leadership skills and engage in building your social and cultural capital. It's also critical that every school has trained careers advice, because so often the young people who have the potential are told really early on, oh, it's not for you, it's not going to work for you, it's not where people like us go. They're headed off at the pass. And there is huge opportunity for business partnership with this, because business has a stake in this. You want the skills, you want more talented, more skilled people to come through. Nobody's gotten enough of them. So investing in that early pipeline opportunity for business is really important. In higher education and further education, yes, the law profession has got to lose its obsession with a small number of universities and a small number of high tariff degrees. But it's more than that. We've got to ensure that all the pathways are open to everyone and that people can progress equally, whatever route you've entered in. The apprenticeship levy is significantly underspent. There is spare money there which could be redirected to support people from low-income families to go on to degree apprenticeships, because even they, the big promise for social mobility, are disproportionately going to middle-class young people who know a good thing when they see it and have the support to be able to get in to those brilliant opportunities. So targeting that levy to help people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds get those value opportunities. And then in the workplace, we've got to hold the profession to account, reporting the data, but also challenging them when the data they report says every year the same thing is happening. Yes, we're getting some applications, but we're not appointing them. We're appointing them, but we're not promoting them. Be challenged on what that data says. Public bodies absolutely can take a lead here. I'd love to see the socioeconomic duty in the Equality Act implemented in England, as it has been in Wales. I'd love to see the significant power of public money being spent using the Social Value Act and the procurement guidance that we already have to make sure that government money is spent to promote social mobility and opportunity for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And we've seen the impetus that social value reporting could have in what's happened with ESG reporting on climate change. Organisations have put focus. People on the board have a responsibility. They're paying attention. It's in the conversations because they know they're going to be held accountable for it, and they know investors are going to look at their reporting. So let's look at what social value reporting on social mobility can do to hold the leadership to account. And conscious that judicial appointments, of course, are independent, but the power of public appointments is really important too. And I'd love to see government really strongly backing itself on broader socio-economic background in public appointments. So we have a model here with the Government Commission City of London Task Force for Financial Services that is really challenging the financial profession to put its backing behind a city that is more equal. I would love to see a similar model explored and government challenging the legal profession to put its own backing behind what we all want, which is a profession that is open and accessible to people who want to be part of it.
Thank you, Sarah. That was excellent. Minister, what has come through in the speeches of both Chris and Sarah is that there is a perception amongst many people, probably around my age, who have considered the legal profession and the legal system as a potential career, that it is not for them, that there is a culture and that there is a layout within the system that is fundamentally not designed for them. And hence we end up in a situation where, as Silex have found, 91% of their members consider the legal profession to be an old boys club. Do you think that is the case? Is there a problem with the perception? And how can we change that?
Yeah, I think that listening to both Chris and Sarah, it's clear that those barriers still exist, and it's not a new problem. I mean, I'm quite old now, but when I was at school and sort of thinking about where I was going to go, I certainly never in a million years would I have thought I would be a Member of Parliament, because it was just not something that was ever something that someone like me would do. So, of course we've moved on from then, but it's clear that there are challenges that still exist. And I think some of the questions are really broad, and Sarah's done a good job of highlighting how these persist in the education system. It's not just in the legal profession. We need to look holistically across the whole of government policy to make sure we are thinking about our education system and keeping that laser-like focus that we have had as a government, but there's always more to do to ensure that that opportunity to progress is open to everybody, and that we do that wider piece as well as just the academic stuff. It's those other things, Sarah, and you really set that out very well, I think, and it's something that I've got personal experience of as well. As how do you operate in these different environments that are not necessarily school? It's not the classroom. It's all these other unwritten rules. It took me a hell of a long time to figure it out myself. And there's no sort of silver bullet there, but I think we need to keep going with the work that we are doing. You've got some very good points about reporting, transparency, as you did, Chris, as well. So I think there's some very sensible, practical suggestions there. We spoke before the session started. I think there's some very simple structural things that can be done. So we will continue to work with yourselves, my other ministerial colleagues, and look at those suggestions, because there's a really big prize here within our grasp.
And Chris, when you speak to your members, and when you speak to other young people especially, but also other people considering a career in the law, how important is it for those from perhaps non-traditional backgrounds to see people in the legal profession from backgrounds like theirs and know that they can make it?
I mean, I think it's really important for people to think that there are people like them who've got through, and therefore they are acceptable. They're part of the network that will succeed. And I think, I was at the opening of the legal year yesterday, which is an amazing 800-year-old tradition in Westminster Abbey and the judiciary process. And I can tell you the first 3/4 of the queue was virtually all white and virtually all men as we went through this procession of sort of 300 or 400 people. And only when it got to sort of our end of the queue, those who know their place, did it look a little more diverse and a little younger and a bit more inclusive. Now, you can't change that in a day, and that's a part of the reality is there. But I think what you can do is lay out paths for people so they can see how they could populate those places. They know that when that judge retires or that individual steps down from that bench, that there's a much more diverse group of candidates to replace them. And at the moment, that isn't true. So I think people want to see visible signs of being included and being acceptable. I think the other thing they want, we need to help them with, is just to build the confidence that comes with being a reasonably well-educated white man. And I'll give you my daughter as an example, who does work actually for the government legal department. And we've gone on and on to her to say, look, you know, one of the things that's interesting in development, I used to run one of the world's top business schools. And one of the big things that you notice is that if you ask a man and a woman a question, a woman will think deeply about her capability and skills and probably doubt that she has them. And a man says yes, even if they've never done it.
That's so true.
And you know, so what, my daughter has this checklist now, and she says, Dad, what I do is I think to myself, what would a mediocre man do in these circumstances? And I do it. And it's really successful. And I sort of think it's true if you come from an ethnic background. If you come from, what you've got to do is start working out what mediocre white men have done really well for the last 150 years. And that, getting that across and helping people think, you know, I can do that. That's easy. Is really important. So it's a combination, William, I think, of role models, clear paths, but as really investing in people's confidence in their own capability. And, you know, for there's a lot of women here who I think might want to say something to this, but I think if you've come through education, you've come through any professional career, but particularly in the law, I think if you've come from a non-traditional background, a lot of people start with the assumption you're not as good as I am. You're not even welcomed in.
And on that point, Sarah, as somebody who knows far more about social mobility than most, could you possibly point to other sectors or other professions where the sort of changes that Chris has talked about for the legal profession have occurred or have been put in place, or other sort of aspects of social mobility that you think can provide an example for what the legal profession can do?
Yeah, so the bad news is no sector is getting this right, particularly at senior levels. So there are sectors where, and the public sector and civil service have done great work in this. Actually, a lot of there's a strong connection with regulated businesses and social mobility. You know, whether you're in a professional services regulated environment, or you know, there are some energy companies and water companies that are doing some fantastic stuff in social mobility and social value, because it's part of the habit of being accountable for what you do. But yeah, the brutal truth is no one is getting this right. No one sector is getting this right. The organisations that typically top the Social Mobility Employer Index that we run, so as sort of individual case study examples, I would point to Brown Jacobson, which is a relatively small law firm, not a Magic Circle law firm, but who've taken some radical steps in terms of the way that they recruit. They've got rid of their grade requirements, in part because of that failure to connect it to progression. They looked at what their grade requirements were doing in terms of whether it was improving their intake. It wasn't. It was screening people out that they wanted, so they've got rid of that, and they've taken some quite radical steps. I'd point to PwC and KPMG, both huge organisations, of course, with huge spending power, but who have really made it, from a leadership perspective, something that is important in those organisations in the DNA. Everyone who works at PwC knows that Kevin Ellis, the managing partner, cares deeply about social mobility, thinks it's part of the business strategy. He doesn't think it's a kind of diversity in HR niche thing. He thinks it's part of what they do and how they do their job and their credibility. And so everyone at PwC knows that if you are from a low socioeconomic background, that you'll be welcomed and recognised on your talents, and that if you don't buy into social mobility, you better keep your mouth shut, because it's not how they do business around there. So those are some specific examples, but as a sector, I don't want law to feel like it's okay to hide in plain sight, but as I said, there is no sector that is really seeing social mobility at the senior levels happening in the rates that it should be.
Okay. Before I ask another question, I would like to throw it open to the audience and see if we have anybody here who would like to ask a question of any of our panellists. We'll start with the lady on the end over here and the lady on the end over here. Sorry, the chapter is coming around with a microphone. Apologies, I should have said.
So my question is, coming from an ethnic minority and in the future willing to go into law and having a big dream of coming into, high managing partner positions or even partner positions, you guys mentioned that the fact that when you come from these backgrounds, you don't have a lot of career prospects. So can I get the Minister's commitments that we are going to start taking these big firms accountable and the government accountable to stop these barriers now? Because we are at a point in our that time in England where multiculturalism is at a rise, and we need to stop. We need to stop people. We need to stop the barriers now. It's a time.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much. This was such a lovely discussion, and it's really great. I'm Dr. Natalie Byram, Director of Research at the Legal Education Foundation, and it's really great to hear people talk about the things that need to happen in terms of recruitment practices, because we see a lot of the fuzzy, warm stuff that people like to do around aspiration raising, when really what it will take to fix this is actually changing the way that firms recruit and intervention. I wanted to ask the Minister, you made a really good point, and apologies, I made a note on my phone, that in your role around victims, that victims need to feel the system understands them and reflects them, and I think that's part of the reason why we all feel that social mobility is so important. And one of the things is data's absolutely key to this, data on who victims are, what happens to them in the system, where they drop out. And the problem is that over successive years, all governments have failed to invest in this. We just don't have this information. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. To give you an example, how many judges sat during COVID? We don't know because we didn't collect the data. How many stalking cases are prosecuted? We don't know because we don't hold the data. Which is more effective at reducing backlogs, remote hearings or Nightingale courts? In our own systems, we can't differentiate between historic and ongoing rape cases, which means trying to stand up and tackle rape is really hard. And essentially, the way we run the justice system at the moment is the equivalent of setting up a hospital and not trying to understand what conditions your patients have, how many operating rooms you've got, how many surgeons you've got, or whether your patients are dying at the end from the treatment. This isn't a particularly new point or a novel point, but it's often said that systems count what matters to them, and every single time governments of any complexion fail to take action to actually take account of the people in the system, what we're sending a message to victims and to users of the justice system is that they don't count. We've had this huge investment in digital infrastructure that should make it more possible to collect this end-to-end information to understand how well the justice system's working for people.
Madam, sorry to be a pain. Could we start to move towards questions? Sorry, because I'm just conscious that there are others who might want to
I guess the question
something.
is, what is the government going to do to really take action on this issue? Because without it, I really think tackling any of these systemic problems is going to be really hard.
So the young lady has left it. On her sort
Yes.
of question, Minister.
She made a very good point, and I hope that she and others in the room heard the sort of comprehensive amount of work that is going on to dismantle those barriers, which are not just for me as Justice Minister, but they include education, they include the whole of society, they include all sorts of economic barriers as well. And it's also the work that's happening in the professions that's been set out by Chris and others. So hopefully she can get that message, I very much hope. If anyone sees her in the corridor, please tell her that absolutely she's right. And on your questions, I recognise what you're saying, but what I would say is, are you familiar with the criminal justice scorecard system that was an innovation under the previous Lord Chancellor that I introduced along with my colleagues as part of the rate review? So we now have criminal justice scorecards for all parts of England and Wales, and they are done by police force areas, they're done by the criminal justice boards. I would strongly recommend you have a look at those. They are new, they are extremely difficult, because this is not all, the levers don't all sit in the Ministry of Justice. They sit with the police, they sit with the CPS, they sit with lots of independent organisations that we do not control for all sorts of good reasons. But it's a really good first start, and it is starting to shine a light. We have to keep pressing on with that, and we will do that. It's a commitment that we started under the last government and the current Justice Secretary is equally as committed to that, and they're already delivering results. You can actually go and see how your local prosecution system is serving victims.
Thank you. Another couple of questions. The gentleman at the back, do you have any others? And the gentleman over there, please.
Yeah, I'm David McNeill from the Law Society. Chris and I talk a lot, and there's more that joins us together as two professions and takes us apart. And one of them is that legal executives and solicitors work together in law firms. And this is a specific question about criminal legal aid. Barristers are freelancers. The Bellamy Review said 15% for law firms, solicitors, and legal execs, 15% for barristers. But it turned out to be 9% for law firms. The barristers, who, this is not an anti-barrister point, but it's a parity point. This is Crown Court cases. This is a tiny minority of criminal cases. The majority of criminal cases and the majority of work, even in Crown Court cases, is undertaken by law firms. That work is becoming increasingly unviable. We were told that the gap between 9% and 15% is £30 million. We were told by James Cartledge just a few months ago, and that £30 million wasn't available. The CBA strike, somewhat bitterly, is being settled for an additional £30 million. But £30 million which wasn't available for law firms, but is available for... and I'm going to actually make a social mobility point here. Is the government favouring one profession in their wigs, in the higher courts, appearing before lawyers with even bigger wigs, at the expense of law firms which are operating around the country doing the kind of grinding work in police stations, in magistrates' courts, youth courts, and in case preparation, actually that are often, saving money in the justice system? There is a kind of inbuilt bias. There seems to be that right from the start, before the CBA strike, barristers were preferred over law firms, and they're preferred even more with the settlement of the CBA strike. Is actually something, parity is something that this government needs to embrace about law firms and barristers.
Thank you. The gentleman over there?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, my name is Mukesh Basra, and let me first of all declare my interest. I am a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. I have been so for nearly 40 years. I'm also a qualified solicitor. I came through that route to qualify as a solicitor. I'm also an accredited mediator, Conservative member and activist. For a number of years, I've been trying to set up meetings with either Justice Ministers or the Justice Secretary to give some sort of input into my experience, and it's been long and varied, nearly 40 years, in all areas of law, but I don't seem to get anywhere. You want to listen to, in most cases, spads who are probably straight out of university, their first job, no experience in law or in the big wild world. So why wouldn't you like to listen to people from the ground, whether it's lawyers in private practice, barristers? They're the ones who have all this experience, who can give examples of what's happening on the ground, rather than listen to people who have no experience whatsoever. That's my question.
Thank you. Minister, I think those were both for you again. Would you like to?
Okay, well, I'm very happy to answer them. And the gentleman at the back, so look, I'll be perfectly frank, I've been in this job less than a month, and I don't hold the portfolio in terms of Minister Cartledge that had that particular responsibility. So I cannot give you a detailed answer on that. What I would say to you is please engage with my fellow minister. I believe it will be Minister Gareth Johnson, I think. So he is the person to get hold of, and I'm sure he will be open to your the points that you make very forcefully. Good. Well, I'm sure you will be. But look, the commitment is there from the Justice Secretary. He said it on the stage earlier. We need to get the wheels of justice moving. He's working constructively with the barristers. I'm sure he'll want to do the same with all the other parts of the system because it's in the interest of victims. Gentleman there. So I don't sort of quite agree with what you say. As a minister, it's really important that we do listen to people on the ground, and that's why we spend a lot of our time working with the representative, such as Chris, who heads up the representative organisations. And in fact, you would be amazed by how much time we spend talking to the different sector organisations, whether it's trade unions, whether it's charities, it's NGOs, it's representative bodies. If you personally want to write to me, I will make sure that your query goes to the right person. But I don't agree also that all we do is listen to SPAD straight out of university. First of all, SPADs are not straight out of university. I am certainly not straight out of university. I've been out of university for a very long time. Maybe as long as you, sir. So, I like to think that we have an understanding of life as ministers. We're not sort of 18-year-old kids. We don't listen to 18-year-old kids. We make our own judgments and we listen to people who are doing the jobs. But I'm very happy to take that up and make sure you get fed into the system.
Can I be helpful to the Minister? Just actually to say, talk to Maxine and Simon. What we haven't as Silex had the privileged access that the Law Society and the Bar have had over years. And I went to see Robert Buckland, who was a huge Silex supporter. And First Lord Chancellor really sit down with us regularly. And he said, I'm in this very successful position as a barrister and then a politician because I taught on Silex law courses 25 years previously. And I know, what your members go through, and I know how valuable they are, and I know what they do. And I think the shift since that has been remarkable. I have regularly met with the Lord Chancellor and ministers on behalf of Silex, and we've been able through that to put the Silex experience and other experiences through that, and that's hence why the government have made some commitments to change. So, come and be part of that and come with us, and we'd love to take that experience with us, because one of the things I've found is that actually it's quite difficult sometimes to get lawyers away from the day-to-day to come and explore and talk. So we really want to take your experience and your opinion in. And that way there really there's a willing ear, from my experience over the last 4 years.
And as someone myself who's just straight out of university, I would say that we aren't all completely useless. And so before we bring today's event to a close, I would like to ask first Sarah and then Chris to say really what, in terms of either genuine sort of legislative, get the word correctly, legislative change, or indeed cultural change they would most like to see from the legal profession to encourage this social mobility. And then Rachel can give us a big nod and hopefully go and implement it. So Sarah.
I think the most powerful thing would be to see targets for social work diversity at senior and partner levels. So we've got firms already setting those targets. We've got firms setting that public target. I'd like to see the biggest law firms setting a target. Over time, you can have a bit of time, but set yourselves a target and then held to account for it.
And Chris.
Yes, I think that's the use of convening power, which Hampton and Davis did really well for women on boards. Mine is, I think, just fix those remaining legislative barriers. They're not difficult to fix. Duty solicitor, frankly, someone just needs to tell the legal aid agency to recognise the qualification. It's as simple as that. And no one knows who is supposed to tell them. So sometimes it's government losing itself in the circle of death of, it's not my responsibility. And some of it's just get the legislative time. Let's amend the Prosecution of Offenders Act. It's there. The legislation's ready to go. It just needs to be attached to something. These are quick things that will really impact victims and indeed those currently accused of crimes who can't get a fair hearing. And both are important in the justice system to be treated fairly. Those two, for starters, would be great.
Rachel, go do it.
Okay, well, look, thank you. I think I've obviously heard very clearly what you've said, and also members of the audience. It's really interesting because we've got such a diverse group of people here with that really quality feedback. And although this actually, frankly, none of this is actually in my portfolio specifically, but as with all of these events, I will be feeding back to my colleagues. We work very closely together. We are a new team. But we've got a lot of energy to drive through some of these things, especially if there are quick wins there, where we can attach those to forthcoming legislative priorities. Then that's absolutely what we'll try and do. So Thank you very much indeed for those really helpful suggestions.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending today, and could we please have a big hand for our panellists?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evenings.